I'm Rebecca Mitchell, and this is the story of how my own brother paraded me around as the family disappointment, until the day he walked into work and saw my name on the building. It's a story about being dismissed, disregarded, and determined to prove everyone wrong, not for revenge, but because sometimes the only way to show your worth is to build something so undeniable that even those who doubted you can't look away. Before we jump in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up in Boston's historic Beacon Hill neighborhood, architecture wasn't just a career in my family, it was our legacy. Mitchell Urban Design had been shaping the city's skyline since my grandfather sketched his first building in 1952. From modest row houses to eventually landing commercial projects that defined parts of downtown, our family name became synonymous with thoughtful urban spaces that honored Boston's history while pushing its future forward. My father, Harold, ran the firm with an old-school mentality. Client dinners, handshakes, and relationships built over glasses of scotch in wood-paneled rooms where the only women present were serving drinks. He was brilliant at what he did, but lived in a world where architecture was a gentleman's profession. And my brother Andrew, 4 years older, naturally charming, and groomed from childhood to inherit everything, fit seamlessly into that world. I still remember my father's proud smile when Andrew presented his first design concept at 13. It was a rudimentary sketch of a boathouse, nothing revolutionary, but Dad had it framed. Natural talent, he'd tell visitors, just like his old man. Meanwhile, I was the quiet one who spent weekends in our basement, constructing intricate miniature cityscapes from cardboard and clay. Not just beautiful buildings, but thoughtful communities, parks integrated with housing, mixed-use developments that considered traffic flow and community gathering spaces. While Andrew designed statement buildings, I was obsessed with how people actually lived in spaces, how architecture could solve problems rather than just make statements. "That's sweet, Becca," my father would say when he occasionally wandered downstairs. "Maybe you'll work in our interior design department someday." I never corrected him, never pointed out that what I was creating wasn't interior design, but urban planning integrated with architectural innovation. I thought my work would speak for itself eventually. I was wrong. By the time I graduated from MIT with dual degrees in architecture and urban planning, with honors, though my family barely acknowledged it, Mitchell Urban Design had grown from a boutique firm to a regional powerhouse with 40 employees and projects across New England. Dad had just landed their first international client, a cultural center in Toronto, and Andrew had officially been named the firm's creative director, despite having only worked there for 3 years after a mediocre performance at Rhode Island School of Design. My graduation gift was an entry-level position at the family company, not as a designer or architect, but as special projects coordinator, which was essentially a glorified administrative role. My father's reasoning? "You need to understand how the business works from the ground up, Rebecca." Andrew had never needed to understand anything from the ground up. He had started designing on day one. For 2 years, I did what was asked. I organized client files, coordinated meetings, ordered supplies. But every lunch break, every evening, after hours, I would work on reimagining problematic projects. The Watson Tower downtown that was struggling with budget overruns? I found a way to reduce materials cost by 15% while actually enhancing the building's environmental efficiency. The contentious Harborside Commons that local residents were protesting? I redesigned the public spaces to create community gardens and affordable retail opportunities for local businesses. I left these proposals on my father's desk with careful notes explaining my thinking. Most came back with a cursory, "interesting" scrawled across the top. Some never came back at all. Everything changed during the pitch for the Franklin Street Revitalization Project, a $200 million redevelopment of a neglected neighborhood that could transform a struggling area into a vibrant community space. The city had specifically requested proposals that addressed affordable housing, sustainability, and cultural preservation, all areas I had extensively studied. The night before the pitch, I found Andrew panicking in the office at 11 p.m., surrounded by half-finished presentation boards and incomplete models. "The sustainability metrics don't make sense," he admitted when I asked what was wrong. "And we're missing the community integration elements the RFP specifically asked for. Dad's going to kill me if we lose this one." I hesitated for only a moment before offering, "I have some ideas, if you want to hear them." By sunrise, fueled by vending machine coffee and years of unacknowledged preparation, I had reworked the entire proposal. Mixed-income housing that actually looked beautiful and dignified. Solar integration that didn't compromise the historical aesthetic. Public spaces designed to foster community gathering and support local businesses. I even created new models and presentation boards, my fingers stained with glue and ink. Andrew looked at the completed work with widening eyes. "This is actually good," he said, sounding genuinely surprised. The pitch meeting went perfectly. The city council members nodded appreciatively at the innovative solutions. The community representatives smiled at the thoughtful inclusion of neighborhood needs. When questions came about the technical aspects of the sustainability features, Andrew smoothly directed them to me. "My sister actually developed those elements. Rebecca, could you explain?" For 15 minutes, I was finally visible. I spoke passionately about carbon footprint reduction, about how good design could create economic opportunities in struggling neighborhoods, about how beauty shouldn't be reserved for the wealthy. The room was engaged, asking questions, taking notes. We won the contract. On the drive back to the office, I felt something shift. Maybe this was it, the moment when my family would finally see what I could contribute. "You were amazing in there, Becca," Andrew said, his eyes still on the ECEC road. "You really saved me. Saved us." My heart swelled. "So you think Dad might let me work on the actual development team now?" Andrew glanced at me, then back at the road, his expression softening into something like pity. "Look, you're great with the technical stuff and the community angle, but this is still a Mitchell project. Dad's vision, my creative direction, you understand, right?" I stared out the window at the Boston skyline, buildings that would stand for generations, shaping how people lived and worked. Buildings with other people's names on them. "Sure," I said quietly. "I understand." The following week, the Franklin Street project was featured in the Boston Architectural Review. The headline read, "Mitchell Men Modernize, Father-Son Duo." Set to transform Franklin Street. A photograph showed my father and brother smiling broadly in front of the site, not a mention of my contribution anywhere in the 4-page spread. That same morning, I found a bonus check on my desk, a generous amount with a sticky note in my father's handwriting. "Good support work on Franklin. Keep it up." Support work. After 4 years of higher education, countless late nights, and literally saving their most important pitch, I was still just support. That evening, we had a small celebration at my parents' home in Beacon Hill. My mother had prepared my father's favorite meal, and several key employees were invited to toast the firm's success. Champagne flowed as my father recounted the pitch, meeting, somehow editing me out of the narrative entirely. And then Andrew presented the community integration plan. Absolutely brilliant stuff. "The council practically signed on the spot," he boasted, clapping my brother on the shoulder. I took another sip of champagne, saying nothing. My mother caught my eye from across the room, her expression a mixture of sympathy and resignation. She had spent 30 years in my father's shadow. She recognized the place I was being assigned. Later, as guests mingled in the living room, I overheard Andrew talking to James Henderson, a prominent developer who had mentored my brother since college. "Honestly, we keep Becca around because she's detail-oriented," Andrew was saying, his Voice slightly loud from one too many drinks. Dad feels obligated, you know? Family duty and all that. But between us, she doesn't have the vision thing. No creative instinct. He tapped his temple meaningfully. She's a great calculator, though. I stood frozen behind the door, the plate of appetizers I'd been bringing in suddenly heavy in my hands. My brother, who I had just saved from professional embarrassment, was actively undermining me to one of the most connected people in Boston real estate. That night, I sat at my childhood desk and opened a notebook. At the top of the page, I wrote, Cornerstone Development Group. Below it, mission: to create spaces where community, sustainability, and beauty exist for everyone, not just those who can afford it. I wasn't going to beg for a place at the Mitchell table any longer. I would build my own. The next morning, I requested a meeting with my father. In his expansive corner office, with views of the harbor, he proudly pointed out to every visitor. I placed my resignation letter on his desk. His eyebrows rose slightly. What's this about, Rebecca? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. If it's about recognition for Franklin Street, we can discuss a title change. Maybe community liaison would better reflect your contributions. I kept my voice steady. I'm leaving to start my own firm. He leaned back in his chair, looking more amused than concerned. Your own firm? Architecture is about relationships, experience, connections. You can't just hang a shingle and expect clients to appear. I'm aware of how the industry works, Dad. I've been watching you my entire life. And what will you call this venture? He asked, a patronizing smile playing at his lips. Cornerstone Development Group. Development? His smile faltered. Slightly. Not architecture? Architecture is only one piece of creating successful spaces. I'm interested in the entire ecosystem. Design, development, community integration, sustainability. He sighed, pushing my letter back across the desk. Rebecca, be reasonable. You're a Mitchell. Your place is here, learning the family business. I've been trying to contribute to the family business for years. You've made it clear there's no real place for me. That's not true, he protested weakly. Last week, I redesigned an entire project that won us a $200 million contract. You and Andrew took full credit. His face reddened slightly. That was Andrew's project. That was Andrew's failure that I turned into a success, I said, my voice finally betraying emotion. And the next day, you were both in the architectural review talking about the Mitchell men, while I got a pat on the head and a bonus for support work. My father stood up, his expression hardening. This is business, Rebecca, not a place for emotional outbursts. You're right, I replied, suddenly calm again. It is business, and I'm making a business decision to take my skills elsewhere. Where will you get startup capital? Clients? Office space? I'll figure it out. He shook his head, reaching for the phone on his desk. I'm calling Andrew in. Maybe he can talk some sense into you. That won't be necessary, I said, standing up. My mind is made up. As I headed for the door, he called after me. You know what your grandfather used to say? Architecture isn't just about designing buildings, it's about building legacies. Your grandfather built this legacy. For you, for Andrew. Walking away is throwing that gift back in his face. I paused, my hand on the doorknob. Grandpa also said great architecture solves problems. I'm going to solve problems you don't even see, Dad. The first year of Cornerstone Development Group was exactly as difficult as my father had predicted. I rented a tiny office above a coffee shop in Somerville, a far cry from Mitchell's gleaming downtown headquarters. My startup capital came from my savings, a small business loan, and selling my car. My first employee was Olivia Chen, a brilliant environmental systems engineer who had been repeatedly overlooked at her previous firm. Why would you leave Mitchell to work for this? She asked during our interview, glancing around at my sparse office with a single desk and mismatched chairs from a thrift store. Because I think we can build something better, I told her honestly. Not just better buildings, a better way of doing business. She studied me for a moment, then nodded. I've seen your design work. The Franklin Street project was innovative. Everyone in the industry knows the sustainability elements weren't Andrew's. I blinked in surprise. They do? She laughed. Of course. Andrew Mitchell doesn't know the difference between LEED Platinum and Fool's Gold. The question is, how? Did you let them take credit? I didn't have a good answer then, but I promised myself I would never let someone take credit for my work again. Our first projects were small. A community garden in Dorchester, a renovation of a struggling artist cooperative in Jamaica Plain. We worked for reduced fees, sometimes just for materials cost, building a portfolio and reputation. At night, I would scour public records for upcoming development opportunities, RFPs that the big firms might overlook, properties with potential that needed vision to unlock. 6 months in, we got our break. A chance to bid on the redevelopment of an abandoned factory in Chelsea into affordable housing units. The budget was tight, the timeline tighter, and the remediation issues significant. Bigger firms had passed, seeing more risk than reward. But I saw possibility. We worked around the clock for 2 weeks, developing a proposal that preserved the building's industrial character while creating bright, energy-efficient homes. Instead of gutting the space, we incorporated original elements: exposed brick, massive windows, even the factory's water tower repurposed as a community rainwater collection system that would reduce utility costs for residents. When we presented to the nonprofit housing organization backing the project, their executive director actually applauded. "This is exactly what we've been trying to explain to developers for years," she said. "Affordable doesn't have to mean soulless. History doesn't have to be erased. You've managed to honor what this building was while reimagining what it could be." We won the contract. The Chelsea Factory Lofts became our calling card, completed on time, under budget, and featured in Architectural Digest as a model for thoughtful urban renewal. The waiting list for units stretched to over 800 families. By our second anniversary, Cornerstone had grown to 12 employees and moved to a proper office in Cambridge. We were small, but developing a reputation for tackling challenging projects that other firms wouldn't touch. Neglected neighborhoods, environmentally complicated sites, historic buildings in danger of demolition. I didn't speak to my family much during this time. My mother called occasionally, reporting that Andrew had been promoted to managing director and the Toronto Cultural Centre was behind schedule and over budget. She never asked about my work, as if acknowledging my success would somehow be disloyal to my father. One evening, while working late, I received an unexpected call. The display showed a number I didn't recognize. "Rebecca Mitchell speaking." "Rebecca, it's James Henderson." I froze. James Henderson, the developer I had overheard Andrew disparaging me to years earlier. "Mr. Henderson, what can I do for you?" "I've been watching your work," he said without preamble. "The Chelsea Factory Lofts are impressive. So is the Dorchester Community Innovation Hub. You have a different approach than your father and brother." "Thank you," I said cautiously, unsure where this was going. "I have a situation I'd like to discuss. Off the record for now. Could we meet for coffee?" The situation, as it turned out, was the Harborview Tower, a prestigious mixed-use development on prime waterfront property that Henderson Development had entrusted to Mitchell Urban Design nearly 2 years earlier. James didn't mince words as we sat in a corner table at a quiet cafe the next morning. "They've missed deadlines, exceeded the budget by 40%, and the design has fundamental flaws that Andrew refuses to address. The sustainability elements don't function properly, and the community spaces are an afterthought." He took a sip of his coffee. "Your father is too proud to admit there's a problem, and Andrew is." He paused diplomatically. more focused on aesthetic than function. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said carefully, "but I'm not sure how I can help. I haven't spoken to my father or brother about business in over 2 years." James leaned forward. "I'm not asking you to speak to them. I'm considering pulling the project from Mitchell entirely. I'd like to know if Cornerstone would be interested in taking it over." My heart raced. Harborview was a $350 million project, far larger than anything we had handled. It would instantly elevate Cornerstone to the top tier of Boston development firms. It would also be a direct blow to Mitchell Urban Design. "May I ask why you'd consider us? We're still a relatively small operation." James smiled. "Because you solve problems. Because your Chelsea project came in under budget without sacrificing quality. Because I've been watching you prove your brother wrong for 2 years." He paused. "And because I remember that conversation at your parents' house, the one where he called you a calculator with no vision. I thought it was short-sighted then. I know it was dead wrong now." I stared at him, processing that he had not only remembered that humiliating moment, but had apparently been tracking my career since. Would taking this project feel like revenge? "Perhaps," he continued, "but I'm a businessman. I'm offering it to you because I believe you'll do it right. The question is, are you interested?" I took a deep breath. I'd need to see the plans, understand the issues, consult with my team. He nodded, sliding a thumb drive across the table. "Everything's here. Review it and call me by the end of the week." 3 days later, after sleepless nights reviewing the Harborview plans with my team, I called James back. "We can fix it," I told him. "But we'd need to redesign significant portions while keeping the existing structural elements. Can you maintain the original timeline for completion?" "Yes, but we'd need full creative control." There was a pause. On the line. "Mitchell won't take this well. Your father has friends on the zoning board, in the mayor's office. I'm aware of the political landscape." "And you're prepared for the family fallout?" I thought about all the times I had been overlooked, underestimated, dismissed. "This isn't about family, Mr. Henderson. It's about doing the job right." "Call me James," he said. "And Rebecca? When you tell them, remember, you earned this." The meeting was set for Monday morning at the Mitchell Urban Design Conference Room. James had insisted on telling my father and brother in person, with me present. I arrived 15 minutes early, standing in the lobby of the building where I had once been merely support staff, now returning as a competitor. My father's assistant's eyes widened when she saw me. "Miss Mitchell, we weren't expecting you." "I'm here for the Henderson meeting," I said calmly. "Oh, of course. They're waiting in the main conference room." I walked the familiar hallway, passing the wall of framed projects, everyone bearing my father's or brother's signature, though I had contributed to at least a third of them. Taking a deep breath, I pushed open the door. My father sat at the head of the table, looking older than I remembered. Andrew sat to his right, scrolling through his phone. James Henderson stood by the window, turning as I entered. "Rebecca," my father said, genuine surprise in his voice. "What are you doing here?" Before I could answer, James stepped forward. "I asked her to join us. This concerns her directly." Andrew looked up from his phone, confusion crossing his face. "Concerns, Becca? How?" "I'll get straight to the point," James said. "I'm terminating Mitchell Urban Design's contract on the Harborview Tower, effective immediately." My father's face reddened. "This is absurd. We have a binding agreement. The project is well underway." "The project is a disaster," James replied calmly. "You've missed every deadline for the past 6 months. The budget overruns are approaching unacceptable levels. And the fundamental flaws in the design that I've repeatedly asked to be addressed remain unchanged." "Design issues can be resolved," my father insisted. "Andrew has been working on solutions." "For 8 months," James interrupted, "with no results." Andrew leaned forward. The changes you're asking for would compromise the architectural integrity of the building. I've explained this repeatedly. James nodded. Yes, you have. Which is why I've decided to bring in a firm that can balance aesthetic vision with practical functionality. He turned to me. Cornerstone Development will be taking over the project. The silence that followed was deafening. My father stared at me as if seeing a stranger. Andrew's mouth literally fell open. This is a joke, Andrew finally said. Becca's company? They've never handled anything remotely this size. The Chelsea factory lofts came in under budget and ahead of schedule, James replied. The Dorchester Innovation Hub is already being studied as a model for community-integrated development. Your sister has demonstrated exactly the skills this project needs. My father found his voice. Rebecca, what are you thinking? This is your family's reputation you're undermining. I met his gaze steadily. I'm thinking about delivering a successful project, Dad. The same thing I've always thought about. You can't possibly handle Harborview, Andrew scoffed. Your entire company is what, 10 people? 17 now, I corrected, and we've already identified the critical issues with your design, the structural problems in the East Wing, the non-functional sustainability systems, the community spaces that don't actually serve the community. Andrew's face flushed. You've seen our plans? That's proprietary information. James raised an eyebrow. They're my plans, Andrew. I paid for them. My father stood abruptly. James, we've been friends for 30 years. Whatever issues exist, we can resolve them. Don't do this. Harold, this isn't personal, James replied. It's business. Your firm has failed to deliver. Rebecca's can. So she sent you those articles about her projects, Andrew sneered. Played up her success. This is what she does, James. Detailed work but no big picture understanding. I felt a familiar surge of anger, but before I could respond, James laughed. Andrew, your sister didn't approach me. I approached her. After watching her build a reputation for executing exactly the kind of vision this project needs. The kind of vision Mitchell used to be known for, before you started prioritizing how buildings look in magazines over how they function in real life. My father turned to me. Rebecca, if you do this, if you take our project, don't expect to be welcomed back into this family. I looked at him, suddenly feeling very calm. Dad, I stopped waiting to be welcomed years ago. I built my own place instead. I turned to James. When can we get full access to the site? Immediately, he replied. My lawyers will handle the contract transition. As we turned to leave, Andrew called after me. You'll fail, and when you do, don't come crawling back. I paused at the door. I never crawled, Andrew. That was always your misconception about me. I've always stood tall. You just never bothered to look up. Outside in the bright Boston morning, James offered me his hand. Congratulations, Rebecca. Harborview is yours. I shook it firmly. Thank you for the opportunity. We won't let you down. I know you won't, he said. Then with a small smile. By the way, I'm also purchasing the building we just left. Part of a portfolio acquisition. I'm planning to rename it once the deal closes next month. Oh? I said, distracted by mental calculations about the Harborview project. Yes, he replied. I was thinking, the Cornerstone building has a nice ring to it. If you have no objections to your company name being on the facade, of course. I stopped. Walking, turning to look back at the sleek glass tower where I had been invisible for so long. The place where my brother had dismissed me as nothing more than a calculator. The building where someday soon he would arrive to work under a sign bearing my company's name. No objections at all, I said, a smile spreading across my face. In fact, I think it's perfect. The following weeks after winning the Franklin Street contract should have been a turning point. I believed, perhaps naively, that proving my capability on such a visible project would finally earn me a real place at Mitchell Urban Design. Instead, it reinforced everything I had tried to ignore about my position in the family business. The Monday after our celebration, I arrived at the office early, hoping to speak with my father about joining the development team for Franklin Street. The project needed someone with my expertise in sustainability and community integration, the very elements that had secured the bid. I had prepared a detailed proposal outlining my potential contributions and how they would benefit the project's execution. I waited outside his office for nearly an hour, watching as colleagues arrived, nodded politely, and continued to their desks. Few stopped to congratulate me on the Franklin Street pitch. Most probably didn't even know I'd been involved. When my father's assistant finally waved me in, he was already on the phone, gesturing for me to leave my proposal on his desk without even making eye contact. Later that day, the first team meeting for Franklin Street was scheduled. I arrived, with my notes, research materials, and genuine excitement about contributing to a project that could transform a neglected neighborhood. The conference room was packed with department heads, senior architects, and key personnel, all men in nearly identical shirts and ties. Andrew stood at the front, my father beside him, both exuding the easy confidence that came from never being questioned. "Ah, Rebecca," my father said when he noticed me hovering in the doorway. "We need someone to take minutes. Grab a seat in the back, would you?" The presumption that I was there as administrative support, not as a contributor, felt like a physical blow. Still, I took a seat and opened my laptop, determined to remain professional. Andrew began outlining the project timeline, assigning team leads for various aspects. Marcus will head up structural engineering. Tom, you've got exterior design. Jason will handle municipal approvals. Dad and I will oversee the overall vision. I raised my hand, which felt childish, but seemed the only way to interject into the rapid-fire delegation. "Yes, Rebecca?" my father asked, impatience barely concealed. "I'd like to lead the sustainability and community integration components," I said clearly, since those were the elements that secured the bid, and I developed those portions of the proposal. The room fell silent. Several team members glanced awkwardly at their notebooks or phones. Andrew cleared his throat. "We've actually decided to bring in Palmer Consulting for the sustainability metrics. They're specialists." "Palmer Consulting?" I couldn't keep the disbelief from my voice. "Their approaches are outdated. They rely on superficial features that look good on paper, but don't deliver real efficiency." My father's expression hardened. "Rebecca, this isn't the time for this discussion." "When is the time?" I asked. "Because I left a proposal on your desk this morning outlining exactly how I could contribute to this project, and you haven't even looked at it." "The teams have been decided," he said firmly. "Palmer has worked with us before. They understand our process." What he meant was, Palmer wouldn't challenge Andrew's vision. Palmer wouldn't suggest innovations that might complicate the Mitchell way of doing things. Palmer would take direction and stay in their lane. "Fine," I said, gathering my materials. "Then you don't need me taking minutes. I'm sure one of the administrative assistants would be happy to help." I left the conference room feeling every pair of eyes on my back. It was the first time I had ever openly challenged my father in a professional setting, and the tension lingered in the air like smoke after a fire. That afternoon, I received an email from my father with the subject, "Light? Professional conduct." The message was brief. "My office, 5 p.m. No signature, no pleasantries." For the rest of the day, I buried myself in work, responding to client emails, refining specifications for a smaller project I had been permitted to assist with, anything to distract from the knot of anxiety in my stomach. At precisely 5 p.m., I knocked on my father's door. "Come in, Rebecca." He sat behind his imposing mahogany desk, a Mitchell family heirloom that had belonged to my grandfather. The massive piece of furniture served as a physical barrier, a symbol of authority that dwarfed anyone who sat across from it. Andrew was already there, lounging in one of the leather chairs with a casual air that suggested this meeting was merely an inconvenience in his busy day. "Sit down," my father directed. I took the empty chair, keeping my back straight, hands folded in my lap. "Your behavior in the meeting today was unprofessional and inappropriate," he began without preamble. "Challenging decisions in front of the entire team undermines our leadership and creates confusion." "I wasn't challenging to be difficult," I replied evenly. "I was offering expertise that would benefit the project." "The project teams were carefully considered," he continued as if I hadn't spoken. "Andrew has a specific vision for Franklin Street that has already been approved by the client. A vision that included my sustainability framework and community integration plans," I pointed out. Andrew sighed dramatically. "Becca, you provided some useful background research, and we're grateful. But this is a complex project that requires experienced leadership. I have 2 advanced degrees directly relevant to this project," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I literally created the elements that won us the bid." "Academic knowledge isn't the same as real-world experience," my father interjected. "You've been with the firm for what, 2 years? And in what capacity?" The dismissive tone made my cheeks burn. "In whatever capacity you've allowed me to serve," I replied. "I've never been given the opportunity to lead a design team or manage a project component, despite being more qualified than several people who have." Andrew leaned forward, his expression a practiced mix of concern and condescension. "Look, Becca, there's no shame in being support staff. Every firm needs people who are good with details, who can handle the paperwork and research. Not everyone is cut out for leadership. Not everyone is handed leadership without earning it," I shot back. His smile faltered. My father's expression darkened. "That's enough," my father said sharply. "Andrew has been groomed for his position since he was in high school. He understands the Mitchell philosophy, our design approaches, our client relationships. He has the natural charisma and vision that this business requires." "And I don't?" I asked quietly. My father hesitated just long enough for the silence to be my answer. "You have other strengths, Rebecca. Technical knowledge, attention to detail. But the face of Mitchell Urban Design needs to project confidence, authority." "You mean it needs to be male?" I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. Andrew actually laughed. "Oh, come on, don't play the gender card. There are plenty of women in architecture, just not many with your—" He gestured vaguely. "Personality." I turned back to my father. "What exactly is wrong with my personality?" He sighed heavily, looking suddenly tired. "You're too analytical, too focused on metrics and functionality. Architecture is an art, Rebecca. It requires passion, vision, the ability to inspire clients and teams. You approach everything like a math problem to be solved." "Because buildings are math problems," I replied. "They're physics and engineering and human psychology and environmental science. Art that doesn't function is just sculpture." "This is exactly what I'm talking about," my father said, gesturing toward me as if my response had proven his point. "You don't understand the soul of what we do here." I stared at him, truly seeing for the first time how limited his perception of me was, how it had always been. In his eyes, I would forever be the serious little girl making careful structures while my brother created bold, sweeping designs that prioritized aesthetics over function. "The Franklin Street decision is final," he continued. "Palmer Consulting will handle the sustainability components, and Andrew will oversee the community integration elements. You'll continue in your current role, and if you demonstrate appropriate professional conduct, we can discuss expanded responsibilities on future projects." The condescension was unbearable. I stood up, smoothing my skirt with trembling hands. "I understand completely," I said. "Thank you for clarifying my position in this company." I turned to leave, but Andrew called after me. "Don't take it personally, Becca. We all have our places. Some of us are just meant for bigger things." I paused at the door, looking back at him. "Keep telling yourself that, Andrew. But remember, those bigger things you're meant for, they only exist because people like me make them work." The door clicked shut behind me with quiet finality. For the next 2 months, I watched from the sidelines as the Franklin Street project moved forward. As I had predicted, Palmer Consulting's sustainability recommendations were superficial and trendy rather than functional. Green roofs that wouldn't support the weight of the soil when saturated, solar panels positioned to catch maximum glare rather than maximum sunlight, water recycling systems that would actually increase energy consumption. I documented every flaw, every missed opportunity, every future problem, not out of spite, but out of professional obligation and personal frustration. When I tried to raise concerns through proper channels, my emails went unanswered. My meeting requests were perpetually under consideration. Meanwhile, Andrew became a minor celebrity in Boston architectural circles. The Franklin Street project was featured in design magazines before a single foundation had been poured. He gave interviews about revolutionizing urban spaces and the Mitchell approach to community revitalization, using phrases and concepts lifted directly from my original proposal without attribution. What hurt most wasn't the lack of credit. It was watching a project with genuine potential for social good being hollowed out and reduced to a glossy marketing opportunity. The affordable housing units were being redesigned to be smaller, less functional. The community spaces were shrinking to make room for more premium retail frontage. The promised job creation program for neighborhood residents had been quietly dropped from the plans. One evening, working late, I encountered Sofia Rodriguez, the community liaison from the neighborhood association that had been instrumental in advocating for the Franklin Street project. She looked troubled, clutching a set of revised plans. "Rebecca," she said when she saw me, relief crossing her face. "Maybe you can explain these changes to me. Everything we agreed upon in the initial proposal seems to be disappearing." I invited her into a small conference room, away from curious ears, and reviewed the plans with her. Her dismay grew with each page. "The child care center is gone," she noted, "and the workforce development spaces have been reduced by half. The farmers' market area is now a valet parking zone." She looked up at me, betrayal evident in her expression. "This isn't what you presented to us. This isn't what we supported." "I know," I said quietly. "These aren't my revisions." "Then whose are they?" "Because these changes fundamentally alter the project's benefit to our community." I hesitated, torn between company loyalty and professional integrity. The project direction has evolved under my brother's leadership. "Your brother," she repeated flatly. "The one who couldn't answer basic questions about how the sustainability features would actually function during the community meeting? The one who didn't know the names of any of the neighborhood schools or community centers?" I didn't confirm or deny, but my silence was answer enough. Sophia gathered the plans with a sharp movement. "I'll be bringing this to the community board tomorrow, and the city council after that. This is a bait and switch, and we won't stand for it." After she left, I sat alone in the darkened conference room, a decision crystallizing in my mind. I could continue to work within a system that fundamentally devalued both me and the principles I believed in, or I could create something new, something that reflected my own vision of what architecture and urban development could be. The following day, news of the community's objections spread through the office like wildfire. My father called an emergency meeting of the Franklin Street team, a meeting to which I was conspicuously not invited. despite being the person who had developed the original community integration plan. From my desk, I could hear raised voices behind the closed conference room door. Andrew emerged around noon, his face flushed with anger, and stormed past without acknowledgement. My father followed shortly after, looking grim. Later that afternoon, I received a text from Sophia. City requiring Mitchell to honor original community benefits or lose permits. Thought you should know. A small victory, but it highlighted a larger problem. Even when I was right, even when my approach was validated by outside authorities, I remained invisible within my own family's company. That evening, I stayed late again, using the quiet hours to finish up some routine work while gathering my thoughts. Around 8 p.m., I heard voices from my father's office, him and Andrew, their tones heated. I shouldn't have been able to hear them from my workstation, but someone had left the intercom phone line open, their voices carrying clearly through the speaker. "This is a disaster," Andrew was saying. "We'll have to redesign half the commercial spaces to accommodate their demands." "We don't have a choice," my father replied. "The city's development committee is backing the neighborhood association. If we fight this, we could lose the entire contract." "It's those damn community benefit requirements Becca put in the original proposal," Andrew said bitterly. "We should never have included them. They're impossible to execute profitably." "They're not impossible," my father sighed. "Just expensive. We'll have to cut corners elsewhere." "Where?" "The building materials are already at minimum quality standard. The sustainability features are the cheapest we could find that still qualify for tax credits." There was a pause, then my father spoke more quietly. "The structural reinforcements in the East Wing. We can reduce those by about 30% and still pass basic inspection." My blood ran cold. The East Wing was designed to house the affordable units and community spaces. Reducing structural reinforcement would make the building less durable, less safe in extreme weather, more expensive to maintain long-term, costs that would disproportionately affect the least affluent residents. "Won't that compromise safety standards?" Andrew asked, a rare moment of hesitation in his voice. "It will meet minimum code," my father replied. "That's all we're legally required to do." I had heard enough. With shaking hands, I disconnected the call, gathered my belongings, and left the office. That night, I barely slept, the conversation replaying in my mind. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I arrived at work early, before the usual crowd, and went straight to my father's office. His assistant wasn't at her desk yet, so I sat in the waiting area, mentally rehearsing what I needed to say. When he arrived an hour later, surprise flickered across his face before he composed himself. "Rebecca, you're here early." "We need to talk," I said, standing up. "It's important." He hesitated, then nodded toward his office. "Come in." I followed him inside, closing the door firmly behind me. Without waiting to be invited, I took a seat across from his desk. "I heard your conversation with Andrew last night," I said directly. "About reducing the structural reinforcements in the East Wing." His expression hardened. "You were eavesdropping on a private conversation?" "The intercom line was left open, but that's not the point. You're planning to compromise the safety of the affordable housing units to cut costs." "We're planning to meet code requirements while adjusting to the financial realities of the project," he corrected stiffly. "Something you don't seem to understand." "I understand perfectly," I replied. "I understand that you're willing to create a two-tier building, premium safety for premium clients, minimum safety for everyone else. I understand that you're prioritizing profit over people. And I understand that this isn't just ethically wrong, it's professionally negligent." "That's enough," he snapped. "You don't have the full picture of the financial constraints we're working with." I reviewed the budget projections, Dad. Even with the community benefits fully implemented, this project will generate a 22% profit margin. You're not cutting corners because you have to. You're doing it because you want to maximize returns at the expense of the very community this project was supposed to help. He leaned back in his chair, studying me with narrowed eyes. When did you become so idealistic? This is business, Rebecca. We have investors to answer to, a reputation to maintain. A reputation for what? Luxury facades with substandard infrastructure? Buildings that look impressive in photographs but fail the people who actually live and work in them? You're exaggerating the situation. I took a deep breath, centering myself. I won't be part of this. I can't be associated with a project that deliberately undermines safety standards for vulnerable populations. What exactly are you saying? I'm saying I have a choice to make. Either the structural specifications for the East Wing remain at the original standards, or I take what I know to the city inspector and the press. His face flushed dark red. You would betray your own family over hypothetical concerns about a building that hasn't even been constructed yet? They're not hypothetical concerns. They're documented plans to create an intentional disparity in safety standards. And this isn't about betraying family. It's about professional ethics. He stood abruptly, towering over the desk. You've always been difficult, Rebecca. Always questioning, always challenging. But this crosses a line. This is disloyalty. I remained seated, refusing to be physically intimidated. No, Dad. Loyalty doesn't mean blind obedience. Sometimes, the most loyal thing you can do is prevent someone from making a terrible mistake. Is that what you think you're doing? Saving me from myself? He laughed bitterly. Your brother was right about you. Too caught up in details and morality to see the bigger picture. And what is the bigger picture? Profit at any cost? Prestige over purpose? He shook his head, disappointment evident in every line of his face. The bigger picture is legacy, Rebecca. Building something that lasts, that carries our name forward. You've never understood that. I understand it perfectly, I replied, softly. I just disagree about what that legacy should be. We stared at each other across the desk, the gulf between our values suddenly unbridgeable. In that moment, I saw with perfect clarity that there was no future for me at Mitchell Urban Design, not one where I could maintain my integrity. I'll make this simple, I said, rising to my feet. Either the structural specifications remain at the original standards, or I resign effective immediately and take my concerns to the appropriate authorities. My father's expression hardened into something I'd never seen directed at me before. Cold, calculating assessment, as if I were a business rival rather than his daughter. You would risk everything. Your career, your family relationships, your future in this industry, over this? Some things are worth the risk. He was silent for a long moment, considering me with new eyes. Finally, he spoke. I've clearly underestimated your conviction. The structural specifications will remain unchanged. Relief washed through me, but it was short-lived. However, he continued, your position here has become untenable. If you no longer trust the leadership of this firm, if you're willing to threaten whistleblowing over internal decisions, then we've reached an impasse. Are you firing me? I asked incredulously. No, I'm suggesting that perhaps it's time for you to explore opportunities elsewhere. Somewhere your particular perspective might be more appreciated. The message was clear. I had won the battle but lost my place in the company, and perhaps in the family. I understand, I said quietly. I'll clear out my desk today. As I turned to leave, he called after me. Rebecca. I paused at the door, looking back. You have talent, he said reluctantly. But talent without judgment, without understanding the realities of business. It's wasted potential. Maybe someday you'll learn that. Maybe someday you'll learn that business without ethics isn't success. It's just profitable failure. I walked out, closing the door gently behind me. In the empty hallway, I took a deep breath, feeling strangely light despite the weight of what had just happened. For the first time in years, perhaps for the first time ever, I had spoken my truth without compromise. As I packed my modest belongings into a cardboard box, reference books, a few personal items, a plant that had somehow survived under the fluorescent office lighting, I felt a presence behind me. Andrew stood there, hands in his pockets, watching me with an unreadable expression. "So it's true," he said. "You're leaving." "News travels fast," I replied, continuing to pack. "Dad told me you threatened to go to the city inspector about the structural modifications." I turned to face him fully. "Is that all he told you?" Andrew shifted uncomfortably. "He said you had concerns." "Concerns," I repeated flatly. "About deliberately reducing safety standards in the affordable housing section while maintaining premium standards elsewhere?" Yes, I had concerns. He had the grace to look slightly ashamed. It would have met code. Minimum code. For a building with your name on it. Is that really the standard you want to set? It's not that simple, Becca. There are financial realities. Don't, I interrupted. Don't repeat Dad's talking points. You're smarter than that. This project would still be highly profitable with the original specifications. This was about maximizing returns, not ensuring viability. He was silent for a moment, then shrugged. Maybe, but that's business. No, that's your business. It doesn't have to be mine. I finished packing and picked up my box. Andrew made no move to help, just watched with that same unreadable expression. "What will you do now?" he finally asked. "Start over. Build something better." He laughed, though there was little humor in it. "Just like that? Without the Mitchell name behind you? Without connections or capital?" "Yes, Andrew, just like that. With nothing but my education, my skills, and my integrity." "You'll be back," he said, with the casual confidence of someone who has never truly struggled. "When you realize how hard it is out there without a family name opening doors, you'll be back." I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt a strange mix of pity and resolve. "No," I said quietly, "I won't." As I walked toward the elevator, box in arms, he called after me. "Good luck finding clients who care more about your ethics than our reputation." I didn't turn around, didn't give him the satisfaction of a response. The elevator doors closed on that chapter of my life, and as the car descended to the lobby, I mentally began writing the next one. That evening, sitting at my kitchen table with a glass of wine and a blank notebook, I wrote 2 words at the top of the first page: Cornerstone Development. Below it, I began to sketch the outline of a company that would build differently. One that would prioritize integrity, sustainability, and genuine community benefit without sacrificing beauty or profitability. I had no clients, no office, no team. I had student loans, a modest savings account, and a reputation only within academic circles and among the handful of community organizations I'd worked with. By conventional wisdom, by my father's metrics of success, I had nothing. But I had something more valuable: clarity. Clarity about who I was, what I stood for, and what kind of legacy I wanted to build. Not one measured in prestige or profit margins, but in the quality of spaces created, in the lives improved, in the communities transformed. I opened my laptop and began to write a business plan. By morning, Cornerstone Development existed, in concept if not yet in practice. And for the first time in years, I felt truly, completely aligned with my purpose. The coming months would test that purpose in ways I couldn't yet imagine. But that night, in the quiet of my apartment, with plans taking shape before me, I knew one thing with absolute certainty: I would never again compromise my vision to fit someone else's idea of success. The first morning of unemployment felt strangely liberating. I woke without an alarm, made coffee in my small kitchen, and sat at my dining table, now repurposed as a makeshift desk, with the business plan I had drafted the night before. The clear light of day, some of my midnight ambitions seemed daunting. Starting an architecture and development firm from scratch, with limited capital and no established client base, was objectively challenging. But the alternative, returning to a situation where my values and skills were constantly undermined, was unthinkable. I created a methodical action plan, the kind of structured approach that Andrew had always mocked as too rigid. First priority, secure the essential business foundations. By the end of the week, I had filed incorporation papers for Cornerstone Development Group, opened a business bank account, and transferred most of my savings to fund initial operations. I created a simple website, designed a clean, professional logo, and ordered minimal business cards and stationery. The next step was harder, finding affordable workspace. Boston's real estate market was notoriously expensive, especially for commercial space suitable for an architecture firm. After several discouraging days of searching, I found myself in Somerville, in a slightly worn brick building above a busy, independent coffee shop. The space was small, just 600 square feet, with exposed pipes, uneven wooden floors, and windows that stuck when you tried to open them. But the rent was manageable, and the location, close to public transportation and within walking distance of several developing neighborhoods, was ideal. I signed a 1-year lease, spending the next weekend cleaning, painting, and setting up the modest furniture I could afford. A drafting table, 2 desks, a small conference table, and a used plotter I found on an architectural equipment exchange forum. The space looked spare but professional, with white walls showcasing framed copies of my academic design awards and conceptual projects. With my new business established on paper and a physical space secured, I faced the most daunting challenge: finding clients. Without the Mitchell name opening doors, I would need to leverage every connection I had built independently. My first potential opportunity came from an unexpected source. Sophia Rodriguez, the community liaison from the Franklin Street project, contacted me 3 weeks after my departure from Mitchell. "I heard you left the family business," she said when we met for coffee. "The rumor is you quit over ethical disagreements about the project." I was careful with my response. "Let's just say there were irreconcilable differences in design philosophy." She nodded, understanding the professional discretion. "Well, their loss might be our gain. Our neighborhood association is working with a nonprofit developer on a much smaller project, converting an abandoned community center into mixed-use space with affordable housing units above and community facilities below. The budget is tight, probably too small for Mitchell to even consider. But we need someone who understands both the technical and community aspects." "I'd be very interested," I said, trying to contain my excitement. "When would you need a proposal?" 2 weeks. But I should warn you, the total project budget is under $5 million. The design fees would be modest. In my previous life, a $5 million project would have been considered barely worth the firm's time. Now, it represented a potential lifeline. "Size isn't everything," I said with a smile. "Sometimes the smaller projects have the biggest impact." Over the next 2 weeks, I worked nearly around the clock, developing a comprehensive proposal for the community center renovation. I approached the project not just as a building redesign, but as a holistic community asset, incorporating flexible spaces that could adapt to different needs, energy systems that would reduce long-term operating costs, and design elements that honored the neighborhood's cultural heritage. I created detailed 3D renderings, cost projections, and a phased construction plan that would allow partial use of the facility even during renovation. The morning of my presentation to the Neighborhood Association Board, I dressed carefully, in a simple professional outfit, gathered my materials, and took the subway to the meeting location, a church basement in the heart of the neighborhood. As I set up my presentation, I noticed several board members whispering, occasionally glancing in my direction. "Is something wrong?" I asked Sophia quietly. "They're just surprised," she replied. "They expected someone. Older, with a team. I nodded, understanding their concern. I may be on my own now, but I spent years at one of Boston's top firms. This project is exactly the kind of work I'm passionate about. When I began my presentation, I could feel the skepticism in the room, but as I walked through the designs, explaining my reasoning for each element, the atmosphere gradually shifted. Board members began asking engaged questions. Several took detailed notes. By the time I finished and displayed the final renderings of what their renovated community center could become, the room had grown warm with possibility. The board president, an elderly woman with a sharp gaze and no-nonsense manner, studied me thoughtfully. "Ms. Mitchell, your designs are impressive, but we've been burned before by architects who make beautiful promises and then disappear once. The work gets difficult. How do we know you'll be different?" It was a fair question. I took a deep breath and spoke from the heart. Because this isn't just another project to me. This is the foundation of my new firm, and I'm betting my entire future on doing it right. I don't have the luxury of cutting corners or prioritizing profit over performance. My reputation, my entire career, depends on this building working, exactly as promised, on budget and on schedule. I can't offer you a big firm with decades of history, but I can promise you will never be anything less than my top priority. There was a moment of silence. Then the board president nodded once. Decisively, "We'll be in touch within the week." 3 days later, Sophia called. "Congratulations. The board voted unanimously to award you the contract." I sat down hard in my office chair, a wave of emotion washing over me. Relief, excitement, vindication, and the sobering weight of responsibility. "Thank you. I won't let them down." "I know you won't," she said. "That's why I recommended you." The Dorchester Community Center became my first official project as an independent architect. The budget was indeed tight, the timeline ambitious, and the expectations high. I threw myself into the work with a fervor born of necessity and passion. Without a team to delegate to, I handled everything myself: client meetings, permitting, contractor coordination, material sourcing, daily site visits once construction began. The work was exhausting, but exhilarating. For the first time in my professional life, I answered to no one but my clients and my own standards. Every decision reflected my values. Every solution bore my unique approach. When challenges arose, as they inevitably did, I faced them head-on, finding creative solutions that often turned problems into opportunities. When we discovered the building's foundation needed more extensive repair than initially budgeted, I reworked the entire first floor plan to incorporate the exposed structural elements as design features, saving thousands in cosmetic finishing while creating a distinctive industrial meets community aesthetic that the neighborhood immediately embraced. When material costs suddenly spiked mid-project, threatening the budget, I spent weeks sourcing alternative materials and salvaged elements from buildings being demolished elsewhere in the city, incorporating them into the design in ways that added character while reducing expenses. Every challenge was a learning opportunity. Every solution a chance to prove my approach could work in the real world, not just in academic theory or behind the safety of a large firm's resources. 6 months into the project, with construction well underway, I received an unexpected visitor at my small office. I was working late, as had become my norm, when a knock at the door pulled me from my concentration. Standing there was Daniel Chen, a well-respected structural engineer who had occasionally consulted for Mitchell Urban Design on complex projects. "Ms. Mitchell," he said with a warm smile, "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Mr. Chen," I replied, surprised. "Not at all. Please come in." He entered, glancing around my modest space with interest rather than judgment. "So, this is Cornerstone Development. I've been hearing interesting things. All good, I hope?" I gestured to the small conference table. "Very good, actually." He sat down, placing his portfolio on the table. I visited your Dorchester project site yesterday. The contractor is a friend, and he couldn't stop talking about your innovative approach to the foundation issues. I smiled, oddly touched that the contractor had noticed and appreciated those solutions. Necessity is the mother of invention. We had structural challenges and a fixed budget. That's precisely why I'm here. Daniel opened his portfolio, revealing photographs of a dilapidated brick warehouse. Are you familiar with the old Kensington textile factory in East Cambridge? I nodded. The building was a local landmark, a beautiful but deteriorating 19th century industrial building that had been vacant for nearly a decade. Of course, it's been tied up in preservation debates for years. Not anymore. The city finally approved adaptive reuse, provided the historical facade and certain interior elements are maintained. A community land trust purchased it for conversion to artist studios, affordable housing, and creative incubator spaces. He slid the portfolio toward me. They need an architect who can handle complex structural challenges within historic preservation constraints, all on a limited budget. Based on what I've seen of your work in Dorchester, I thought you might be interested. My heart raced. The Kensington was exactly the type of project I dreamed of. Historically significant, community-focused, technically challenging. I'm definitely interested, but surely they're considering larger firms with more extensive preservation experience. Daniel smiled. They were, until the bids came in at nearly double their budget, with timelines that would leave the building vacant for 2 more years. They need someone who can think differently. He tapped the portfolio. Someone who sees constraints as creative opportunities rather than problems. When would they need a proposal? 2 weeks, and Rebecca? He hesitated. I should mention that your brother has also expressed interest, now that the preservation restrictions have been clarified. Mitchell Urban Design submitted a revised concept yesterday. The news sent a cold jolt through me. Competing directly against my former firm, against my brother, was something I had hoped to avoid, at least until Cornerstone was more established. I see, I said carefully. That complicates things. Daniel shrugged. Perhaps, or perhaps it clarifies them. The committee is specifically looking for approaches that prioritize community benefit over architectural spectacle. From what I've heard, that's not exactly the Mitchell specialty these days. I couldn't help but smile at his diplomatic understatement. Thank you for bringing this opportunity to me, Mr. Chen. I'll have a proposal ready within the week. After he left, I stood at my drafting table, staring at the photographs of the Kensington. This wasn't just a potential project. It was a direct challenge to prove that my approach could compete against, and potentially outperform, the firm that had deemed me unsuitable for leadership. The next 10 days became a blur of research, design, and innovation. I studied the building's original architectural plans, which I accessed through the city archives. I consulted with preservation specialists about techniques for reinforcing historic structures while maintaining their character. I met with representatives from the artist community to understand their specific needs for studio spaces. Most crucially, I developed a phased renovation approach that would allow portions of the building to be occupied and used even while construction continued in other sections, a strategy that would generate early rental income to help fund later phases of the project while providing immediate community benefit. My proposal was comprehensive, innovative, and meticulously detailed. What it lacked in glossy presentation, it made up for in practical solutions and financial feasibility. I delivered it personally to the Land Trust's offices, trying not to notice the sleek Mitchell Urban Design portfolio that sat prominently on the reception desk. The waiting period that followed was excruciating. I threw myself back into the Dorchester project, which was progressing well but still required constant attention. I visited potential sites for future projects, building relationships with community organizations and small developers who might become clients. I attended networking events where I once would have been welcomed as Harold Mitchell's daughter, but now had to establish my own presence from scratch. Through it all, I tried not to think about the Kensington proposal or what it would mean for Cornerstone's future, and my own validation, if I won or lost against my former firm. 3 weeks later, I received the call. The Land Trust's executive director was direct and professional. "Ms. Mitchell, we've reviewed all submissions for the Kensington project and would like to move forward with your proposal." I gripped the phone tightly, hardly daring to believe what I was hearing. "I'm honored. May I ask what factors influenced your decision?" "Several things. Your phased approach making the building partially operational within 6 months rather than 2 years. Your preservation strategies that actually reduce costs rather than adding them. Your thoughtful incorporation of community feedback on studio design." She paused. "And frankly, your commitment to being personally involved throughout the process." The larger firms, including Mitchell, proposed delegating the project to junior teams after the design phase. The committee felt your hands-on approach would ensure better outcomes. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very quality my father had dismissed as a limitation, my detail-oriented, problem-solving focus, had become my greatest competitive advantage. News of my selection for the Kensington project rippled through Boston's architecture community. It wasn't a massive commission by industry standards, but the building's historic significance and the direct competition with established firms made it noteworthy. Several local design blogs mentioned the surprising selection of new firm Cornerstone, development over established players, including Mitchell Urban Design. I didn't have time to savor the victory. The Kensington project required immediate attention, and the Dorchester Community Center was entering its final construction phases. I was working 16-hour days, 7 days a week, functioning on coffee and determination. I needed help, professional, qualified help, but couldn't yet afford to hire full-time staff. The solution came in the form of Jessica Lynn, a brilliant, recent graduate from MIT's architecture program who had interned at Mitchell during my final year there. She contacted me after reading about the Kensington project. "I remember how you were the only person who actually explained things to the interns instead of just assigning tasks," she said when we met for coffee. "And I've seen your work on the Dorchester Center. It's exactly the kind of socially conscious design I want to be involved with." "I appreciate that," I said. "But I should be transparent. I can't offer the salary or benefits that a firm like Mitchell would." Jessica smiled. "I had an offer from them, actually, and from 2 other large firms. But I'd rather do meaningful work for less money than design another luxury condo development that no one who grew up in that neighborhood could ever afford." Her idealism reminded me of myself not so long ago. Before years at Mitchell had nearly convinced me that profit always trumped purpose. I can offer part-time work to start, with the hope of full-time as we grow, and a collaborative environment where your ideas will actually be heard. "That's more valuable than a corner office," she said, extending her hand. "When do I start?" With Jessica's help, even part-time, I could finally divide some of the workload. She took over much of the technical documentation for Dorchester, freeing me to focus on the complex preservation challenges at the Kensington. Her fresh perspective and recent education in cutting-edge sustainable technologies brought new dimensions to our designs. Most importantly, I no longer worked in isolation. I had someone to brainstorm with, someone who understood and shared my vision. The Dorchester Community Center was completed 9 months after I left Mitchell Urban Design, on time and on budget. The opening celebration drew hundreds of neighborhood residents, city officials, and even a few curious architects from other firms. The building was everything I had promised: beautiful, functional, energy efficient, and genuinely reflective of the community it served. Standing in the main hall during the celebration, watching children explore the new library corner while seniors gathered in the cafe area and young adults tested the media lab equipment, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment that went beyond professional pride. This building would improve lives in tangible ways. It would create opportunities, strengthen community bonds, provide safe space for people who needed it most. It was architecture with purpose, exactly what I had always believed was possible. The neighborhood association president found me observing from a quiet corner. "You did it," she said, genuine admiration in her voice. "When we hired a one-woman firm with no track record, our board thought I was crazy. But you delivered everything you promised, and then some." "Thank you for taking that chance on me," I replied. "It meant more than you know." She smiled. "Well, word is spreading. 3 other neighborhood associations have asked me for your contact information in the past week alone. I hope you're planning to expand." That conversation proved prophetic. In the months following the Dorchester opening, Cornerstone Development began receiving inquiries from community organizations, small developers, and nonprofit housing groups throughout Boston and surrounding communities. Not massive corporate clients or luxury developments, but mission-driven projects that larger firms often overlooked or undervalued. With each successful project, our reputation grew. The Kensington renovation proceeded even more successfully than anticipated, with the first phase, artist studios and community gallery space, opening just 7 months after construction began. The Boston Globe featured it in a Sunday article about innovative approaches to historic preservation, specifically highlighting our methods for maintaining architectural character while significantly improving energy efficiency. Jessica transitioned to full-time, and we hired 2 more staff, a sustainability specialist and a project coordinator. We outgrew our small office above the coffee shop and moved to a larger space, still modest by industry standards, but functional and professionally. Appointed, we gained a reputation for taking on challenging projects that other firms had deemed too difficult or insufficiently profitable, and transforming them into award-winning examples of community-centered design. 18 months after leaving Mitchell Urban Design, I was invited to speak at a regional conference on sustainable urban development. The topic: reimagining community spaces, function, beauty, and belonging. As I prepared my presentation, focusing on our work at Dorchester and the Kensington, I couldn't help reflecting on how far Cornerstone had come in such a short time. We weren't the largest firm, or the most prestigious, or the most profitable. But we were building a portfolio of work that matched my original vision. Spaces that served real human needs, that respected both environmental and community contexts, that demonstrated how good design could be accessible to all, not just the wealthy. On the morning of the conference, I arrived early to review the venue and test my presentation. As I waited in the lobby, scanning my notes one last time, a familiar voice caught me off guard. "They have you speaking in the main hall. Impressive." I looked up to find Andrew standing a few feet away, looking exactly as he had the last time. I saw him, confident, perfectly tailored, slightly condescending. "Andrew," I said, genuinely surprised, "I didn't know you were attending this conference." He shrugged casually. "Dad thinks we need to show more interest in sustainability. It's becoming a marketing requirement for larger clients." He glanced at my presenter badge. "Your session is opposite mine. Unfortunate scheduling." "What are you presenting on?" I asked, maintaining professional courtesy despite the awkwardness. "Luxury and sustainability, the new urban paradigm." He straightened his already perfect tie. "We've incorporated some green features into the Westbrook Tower project. Solar facade elements, rainwater collection, the usual checklist items." I nodded, recognizing the project name from industry publications, a high-end residential tower with units starting at $2 million. Well, any step toward sustainability is positive. He studied me for a moment, his expression shifting to something more genuine. You look good, Becca. Busy, obviously, but good. The small firm life seems to agree with you. It does, I admitted. Being able to choose projects that align with my values makes all the difference. I heard about the Kensington, he said, a hint of reluctant admiration in his voice. Dad was furious when we lost that bid. He couldn't believe they chose a startup with no resources over Mitchell. It wasn't about resources, I explained. It was about approach. They needed someone who would prioritize community needs over architectural spectacle. He winced slightly at my choice of words. Well, you've certainly made a name for yourself in that niche. The socially conscious architect, taking on projects the big firms ignore. It's not just about social consciousness, I corrected. It's about smart design that solves real problems. Sometimes that means affordable housing. Sometimes it means historic preservation. Sometimes it means reimagining underutilized spaces. But it always means putting function and human experience first. Andrew checked his watch. I should go prepare. My session starts in 30 minutes. He hesitated, then added, For what it's worth, what you're doing. It's impressive. Starting from scratch, building something that reflects your values. It takes guts. The unexpected compliment caught me off guard. Thank you, I said simply. He turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Dad asked about you last week. First time? In months. I think he saw your name on the conference program. What did he say? I couldn't help asking. Andrew's mouth quirked in a half smile. He said, I wonder if she's still being stubborn about compromising to meet market demands. I told him based on your project list, it doesn't look like you're compromising on anything. After he walked away, I stood there processing the interaction. It wasn't reconciliation, not even close. But there had been a hint of respect in Andrew's manner that hadn't existed before. An acknowledgement, however. Reluctant that my path had validity even if it differed from the Mitchell way. My presentation that day was the most personal I had ever given. I spoke not just about technical solutions and design strategies, but about the philosophy that drove our work at Cornerstone. The belief that architecture should serve community, needs, that sustainability wasn't just about energy metrics, but about creating spaces that could adapt and thrive over generations. The response was overwhelming. My session, initially scheduled for a medium-sized breakout room, had to be moved to a larger space as attendees filled every seat and stood along the walls. The Q&A session ran long, with architects, developers, and community organizers eager to learn more about our approaches. Afterward, I was surrounded by people exchanging business cards, requesting meetings, offering collaboration opportunities. Among them was James Henderson, one of Boston's most prominent developers and a longtime Mitchell client. He waited patiently until the crowd thinned before approaching. Ms. Mitchell, he said, extending his hand. Remarkable presentation. You've given me quite a lot to think about. Thank you, Mr. Henderson, I replied, surprised by his interest. I'm glad you found it valuable. More than valuable, challenging, in the best possible way. He handed me his card. I have a project I'd like to discuss, something that might benefit from your particular perspective. Could we meet next week? I accepted his card, a surreal feeling washing over me. James Henderson had been one of my father's most important clients for decades. His company developed some of the most significant commercial properties in Boston. And now he was approaching me, not as Harold Mitchell's daughter, but as the founder of Cornerstone Development, a firm with its own distinct identity and reputation. I'd be happy to meet, I said, maintaining my professional composure despite my internal amazement. As I left the conference that evening, I felt a profound shift in my journey. Cornerstone was no longer just a refuge from Mitchell urban design, no longer just a personal statement of independence. It had become a legitimate contender in Boston's architectural landscape, Not by mimicking the established firms or chasing prestige projects, but by carving out our own path, defining success on our own terms. The David Chen Y had known just 2 years earlier, uncertain, underestimated, desperate to prove her worth, felt like a different person entirely. In her place stood the founder and principal of a growing firm with a distinct philosophy and a portfolio of meaningful work. Someone who had stopped trying to earn a place at someone else's table and instead had built her own. That night, I added a new page to the journal where I tracked Cornerstone's progress. At the top, I wrote, "Today, for the first time, I realized I'm no longer trying to prove my father wrong. I'm simply building what I always believed was possible, and somehow that's even more satisfying." The Maritime Trust building renovation progressed rapidly through Boston's unseasonably mild fall. We preserved the historic facade with its ornate copper detailing and arched windows while transforming the interior into a showcase of Cornerstone's values: sustainable materials, collaborative workspaces, natural light flooding through restored skylights. Where Mitchell Urban Design's headquarters projected power and prestige, our space embodied connection and purpose. Even the furniture reflected our philosophy. Locally crafted conference tables made from reclaimed timber, ergonomic workstations, arranged to foster collaboration rather than hierarchy. As Harborview Point construction accelerated, I divided my time between overseeing our new headquarters renovation and regular site visits to the waterfront development. The project was now attracting national attention, with architecture and urban planning publications requesting tours and interviews. Most gratifying were the inquiries from other cities, planners and developers from Chicago, Seattle, and Philadelphia, wanting to understand how we'd managed to create a financially viable model for truly integrated development. "This is becoming more than just a Boston project," Victoria Winters observed during one site walkthrough as we inspected the central plaza taking shape. "You're establishing a template that could influence development nationwide." Her observation was confirmed when the National Urban Design Council requested that I deliver the keynote at their annual symposium, an honor typically reserved for architects with decades of established success, not founders of 3-year-old firms. The invitation recognized that what we were doing at Harborview wasn't just creating an exceptional building. We were demonstrating a new paradigm for development. 6 weeks before Cornerstone was scheduled to move into the Maritime Trust building, I received a message from Andrew asking to meet for coffee. These meetings had become semi-regular over the past months. Not quite brotherly bonding, but a careful professional rapprochement. Still, there was something in his tone that suggested this wasn't a routine check-in. When I arrived at our usual cafe, Andrew was already seated, an architectural magazine open on the table. He pushed it toward me without greeting. Page 47. I flipped to the indicated page and found a feature on emerging trends in urban development. There, prominently displayed, was a photograph of our father touring Harborview Point, studying the public plaza design with evident interest. The caption read, "Even traditional firms like Mitchell Urban Design are taking note of the integrated approach pioneered by newer players like Cornerstone Development." "When did this happen?" I asked, genuinely surprised. "Dad never mentioned visiting Harborview." 3 weeks ago, Andrew replied. Asked for a private tour from the Henderson project manager. Spent nearly 4 hours examining everything in detail. He didn't tell me either. I found out from our marketing director who saw him there. I studied the photograph more carefully. My father's expression was professional, analytical, the face he wore when seriously evaluating architectural work. "What do you think it means?" I asked. Andrew sipped his coffee. "It means you've accomplished something he can't ignore. Something significant enough that Harold Mitchell, who built his career on luxury developments with segregated affordable components, is now studying integrated design principles firsthand." "Professional curiosity," I suggested. "That doesn't necessarily indicate approval." "Maybe not," Andrew conceded. but it's more than he's done for any other approach that challenges Mitchell orthodoxy. He leaned forward. After he visited Harborview, he called a meeting with our senior design team, asked them to prepare an analysis of contemporary integration techniques in mixed-use development. Your techniques, basically. The information was startling. My father analyzing Cornerstone's methods, asking his team to study our approach. It represented a shift I wouldn't have thought possible 2 years earlier. And how did the team respond? I asked. Mixed reactions, Andrew admitted. Some of the old guard were dismissive, said it was just trendiness that wouldn't last. But the younger partners, especially Thomas and Maria, were enthusiastic. They've been trying to push Mitchell in this direction for years. I nodded, remembering Thomas and Maria from my Mitchell days, talented architects who had often supported my community-focused ideas, only to be overruled by my father or Andrew. So, what happens now? I asked. Andrew shrugged. Hard to say. Dad doesn't admit he's reconsidering his approach. He frames it as market research or competitive analysis. But the fact that he's looking at all indicates something has shifted. As we finished our coffee, Andrew mentioned casually, "The Urban Development Council Gala is next month. Mitchell will have our usual tables. You should attend. As Harborview's architect, you'll be expected." The annual gala was Boston's premier architectural networking event, a night when the city's design elite gathered to celebrate exemplary projects and forge important connections. In previous years, I had attended as Harold Mitchell's invisible daughter. Now I would return as Cornerstone's founder, with our work featured prominently in the evening's program. "Will you be there?" I asked. "Of course. And Dad." Andrew gave a wry smile. "Should make for an interesting evening." The following weeks brought a whirlwind of activity. Cornerstone moved into the renovated Maritime Trust building, with the team delighting in the natural light, harbor views, and collaborative spaces. Harborview Point's first phase, the public areas and community facilities, neared completion, with landscaping being installed and finishing touches applied to the innovative Central Plaza. Most significantly, the waiting list for both affordable and market-rate units had grown exponentially as word spread about the development's unique approach. 3 days before the Urban Development Council Gala, I received an unexpected call from James Henderson. "Rebecca, good news. The council is presenting Harborview Point with the Innovation in Urban Development Award at the gala. Normally, they wait until projects are fully completed, but they've made an exception given the significant impact your approach is already having on development practice." The recognition was extraordinary. The Innovation Award was one of the industry's most prestigious honors, rarely given to projects still under construction. More remarkable was that it would be presented at an event where my father would be in attendance, watching as his daughter's firm received recognition for challenging Mitchell Urban Design's established practices. The night of the gala, I arrived. With Jessica and several other Cornerstone team members, all of us dressed more formally than our typical workday attire. The grand ballroom of the historic Parker House Hotel was filled with Boston's architectural elite, the same crowd that had once dismissed me as Harold Mitchell's quietly competent but unexceptional daughter. As we entered, heads turned, conversations paused momentarily as people recognized me. Some offered genuine congratulations on Harborview's progress. Others watched with calculated interest, clearly reassessing Cornerstone's position in Boston's architectural hierarchy. From across the room, I spotted my father engaged in conversation with several longtime associates. He hadn't seen me yet, but the encounter seemed inevitable. This wasn't a large venue, and the award presentation would ensure my visibility. "Rebecca Mitchell," a warm voice called. I turned to find James Henderson approaching with Victoria Winters. "Cornerstone's founder looks quite at home among Boston's architectural royalty tonight." I smiled at his characterization. "Hardly royalty. We're still the newcomers here." "Not anymore," Victoria observed. "Not with Harborview redefining waterfront development and the Innovation Award heading your way." As we chatted, I became aware of a presence nearby. My father had detached from his conversation group and now stood just within earshot, ostensibly examining a display of nominated projects, but clearly monitoring our interaction. James noticed too. "Harold," he called, gesturing my father over. "Join us. We were just discussing the impact Harborview is having on development approaches." My father approached with professional composure, nodding cordially to Henderson and Victoria. "James, Ms. Winters?" Then, with careful neutrality, "Rebecca." "Dad," I acknowledged. "Good to see you." James, either oblivious to the tension or deliberately ignoring it, continued enthusiastically. "Harold, your daughter's design for Harborview is revolutionizing how we approach waterfront development. The integration of affordable units throughout, rather than segregating them, the community spaces that genuinely function as gathering places, it's transformative." My father's expression remained measured. "The approach is certainly distinctive. The market will ultimately determine its validity." "The market has already spoken," Victoria interjected. "The waiting list for Harborview units is unprecedented, across both luxury and affordable categories. And 3 other developers have approached us about applying similar principles to their projects." Something flickered across my father's face. Surprise, perhaps, or reluctant acknowledgement. Before he could respond, the announcement came for guests to take their seats for dinner. "We should continue this conversation later," James said. "Harold, you and Rebecca must have much to discuss regarding the evolution of Boston development practices." As we moved toward our respective tables, Mitchell Urban Design at the front of the room, Cornerstone midway back, I felt my father's gaze follow me briefly. Not hostile, not approving, but thoughtful, assessing. Throughout dinner, I was acutely aware of the Mitchell table, though I tried to focus on my own colleagues and the industry connections seated around us. Occasionally, I caught Andrew looking in my direction, his expression both curious and concerned. My father maintained his usual professional demeanor, engaging with those around him while giving nothing away. After the meal concluded, the awards presentation began. Various categories recognized excellence in historic preservation, sustainability, commercial innovation, and community impact. Mitchell Urban Design received recognition for their Toronto International Arts Center, with my father accepting with practiced graciousness. When the Innovation in Urban Development category was announced, I felt Jessica squeeze my hand supportively as they described each nominated project. The presenter opened the envelope with theatrical slowness. The award goes to Cornerstone, Development Group for Harborview Point Integrated Community Design. Our table erupted in surprised celebration. In a daze, I made my way to the stage, accepting the Crystal Award with steady hands. Standing at the podium, facing the elite of Boston's architectural community, including my father and brother in the front row, I felt the weight of the moment. "Thank you for this tremendous honor," I began. "Harborview Point represents more than just a development project for Cornerstone. It embodies our fundamental belief that architectural excellence and social responsibility are not opposing forces, but complementary goals." As I spoke about our vision for a new kind of urban development, I noticed expressions changing throughout the room. Some skeptical, others intrigued, a few openly enthusiastic. My father's face remained impassive, but I caught a subtle nod when I described our approach to preserving historical context while creating forward-looking functionality. In closing, I'd like to acknowledge that innovation rarely emerges in isolation. It builds upon the work of those who came before, even when it takes different directions. Cornerstone's approach evolved from both alignment with and reaction to established practices in our industry. We stand on the shoulders of Boston's rich architectural tradition while looking toward a more integrated future. It was as close as I could come to publicly acknowledging my architectural lineage. The education I had received, however indirectly, from growing up in the Mitchell tradition before forging my own path. As I returned to my seat amid warm applause, I caught Andrew's eye. He offered a small, genuine nod of respect. My father's expression remained composed, but he joined in the applause with deliberate professionalism. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations and networking. As the event wound down, I found myself standing at the edge of the ballroom, the Crystal Award in hand, taking a moment to absorb all that had transpired. A presence beside me disrupted my thoughts. "Your acceptance speech was gracious," my father said, his voice measured, diplomatic even. "Thank you," I replied. I meant what I said about innovation building on tradition. He studied me for a moment, something softening almost imperceptibly in his expression. "The Harborview design is genuinely innovative, not just aesthetically, but structurally and conceptually. You've created something distinctive, coming." From Harold Mitchell, this qualified praise was unprecedented. "That means a lot, coming from you." He glanced around the emptying ballroom. When I was starting out, architecture was a different profession. The social considerations were secondary to the architectural statement. The designer's vision was paramount. "Times change," I said gently. "The challenges facing cities today require different approaches." "Perhaps." He hesitated, then added, "Your grandfather, my father, used to say that the true measure of a building wasn't in the architectural journals, but in how people lived within it. I lost sight of that somewhere along the way." The admission stunned me. Harold Mitchell acknowledging any kind of oversight was unheard of. "It's never too late to reconsider approaches," I ventured. He gave a short laugh. "At my age? Mitchell is what it is. But you—" He paused, meeting my eyes directly. "You've built something with integrity, Rebecca. Something that reflects a clear vision and purpose. I may not fully embrace that vision, but I can respect what you've accomplished." Before I could respond to this unexpected acknowledgement, Andrew joined us. "The industry blogs are already writing about Cornerstone's win," he reported, showing us his phone screen. "They're calling it a generational shift in urban development philosophy." My father frowned slightly. "Dramatic as usual. The industry loves declaring revolutions." "Actually," Andrew said carefully, "I think they might be right this time. What Rebecca's doing at Harborview is fundamentally different from our approach, and clients are responding." My father looked between us, something shifting in his expression. "Well, it seems both my children have developing opinions on the future of architecture." "I've always had opinions, Dad," Andrew replied with surprising candor. "I just stopped expressing them when they differed from yours." The frank admission created a momentary tension. My father straightened his tie, a habitual gesture when uncomfortable. "It's getting late," he said finally. "Congratulations again on your award, Rebecca. Mitchell will be watching Harborview's progress with interest." As he walked away, Andrew lingered. "That's the closest he's ever come to apologizing to anyone, ever." "I don't think it was an apology," I said. "More like reluctant recognition." "For Dad, that's practically a warm embrace." Andrew smiled wryly. "The Mitchell Urban Design Quarterly Planning meeting is tomorrow morning. It's going to be interesting." "How so?" "Because I'm going to propose that we reconsider our approach to mixed-use developments, using Cornerstone's integrated model as a case study." I stared at him, genuinely surprised. "Dad will hate that." "Probably," Andrew agreed. "But Mitchell needs to evolve or we'll keep losing commissions like Harborview. Sometimes even established firms need to learn from newcomers." The months following the gala brought accelerated progress at Harborview Point. The first residents moved into completed units. The public spaces came alive with activity, and the commercial spaces began filling with a diverse mix of established businesses and local entrepreneurs through our tiered leasing system. Most gratifying was watching the community spaces function exactly as we had designed them, bringing together residents from different economic backgrounds in shared activities and amenities. Industry recognition continued to build. Architecture. Schools requested site tours for students. Developers from across the country visited to understand our integrated approach. The mayor's office featured Harbor View prominently in their promotional materials for Boston development. Through it all, I maintained occasional contact with Andrew, who kept me informed about gradual shifts at Mitchell Urban Design. My father never reached out directly, but I heard through industry channels that he had begun incorporating elements of Cornerstone's community-centered approach into Mitchell's newer projects, albeit cautiously and incrementally. 8 months after the gala, with Harborview Point nearing final completion, I received an unexpected invitation from the Boston Architectural Foundation. They were honoring my father with a Lifetime Achievement Award and requested that I introduce him at the ceremony. The invitation stunned me. What could I possibly say about Harold Mitchell, the father who had told me I'd never be good enough to lead, the architect whose approaches I had deliberately countered with Cornerstone's philosophy? After careful consideration, I accepted. Whatever our personal history, my father had shaped Boston's skyline for 4 decades. His technical excellence and aesthetic vision deserved professional recognition, even if his approach to community integration had been limited. The evening of the ceremony, I stood at the podium facing a room filled with the city's architectural establishment. My father sat in the front row, his expression characteristically composed. Harold Mitchell has defined Boston architecture for more than 40 years, I began. His unwavering commitment to technical excellence and aesthetic innovation established standards that continue to influence how we approach urban design. While our methodologies have sometimes differed, a knowing murmur rippled through the audience. His insistence on precision, quality, and contextual awareness shaped my own architectural foundation in ways I'm still discovering. I continued, focusing on his notable achievements, his mentorship of dozens of successful architects, his contributions to Boston's evolving skyline. As I spoke, I noticed something unexpected in his expression. Not just professional appreciation for the acknowledgement, but a hint of genuine emotion. In closing, I said, great architecture isn't created in isolation. It emerges from dialogue, sometimes harmonious, sometimes contentious, between established wisdom and emerging perspectives. Harold Mitchell's legacy isn't just in the buildings that bear his name, but in the conversations his work continues to inspire about what architecture can and should accomplish, including conversations with those, like me, who have occasionally taken different paths. As applause filled the room, my father approached the podium. As we passed, he squeezed my arm briefly, a gesture so unexpected and uncharacteristic that I nearly missed a step. His acceptance speech was vintage Harold. Mitchell, confident, articulate, focused on architectural accomplishment rather than personal reflection, until the end, when he departed from his prepared remarks. I've been fortunate to work during an era of extraordinary opportunity in Boston development, he said. But architecture is an evolving discipline. The approaches that served one generation must adapt to meet the challenges facing the next. He paused, scanning the room before his gaze settled momentarily on me. Sometimes it takes fresh perspectives to reveal new possibilities. Sometimes those perspectives come from unexpected sources, even from those whose capabilities we may have initially underestimated. The acknowledgement, however oblique, hung in the air. Harold Mitchell admitting he had underestimated someone, specifically his daughter, was unprecedented. After the ceremony, he found me at the reception. "Your introduction was generous," he said. "More than I perhaps deserved." "It was truthful," I replied. "Your work has shaped Boston architecture, regardless of our different approaches." He nodded, then surprised me further. "I visited the Maritime Trust building last week. Saw what you've done with the renovation. Exceptional work. honoring the historical structure while creating thoroughly contemporary function. Thank you, I said, genuinely touched by his interest and approval. You've built something remarkable with Cornerstone, he continued. Not just a successful firm, but a new development model that's influencing the entire industry. That's a genuine achievement, Rebecca. Before I could respond, he added, I was wrong to tell you that you would never be good enough to lead. Clearly, you are. You simply needed to lead in your own way, not mine. The words I had never expected to hear from Harold Mitchell hung in the air between us. Not a full apology, but a significant acknowledgement. Thank you for saying that, I said simply. He nodded once, decisively. Mitchell and Cornerstone have different philosophies, different approaches. But perhaps there are projects where those differences could be complementary rather than opposing. What are you suggesting? I asked, caught off guard by this apparent overture. Nothing specific at the moment, just an openness to possibilities that I might have dismissed previously. He glanced around at the gathering. I should circulate. But think about it, Rebecca. There may be opportunities where Mitchell's resources and Cornerstone's vision could create something neither could achieve alone. As he moved away to greet other guests, I stood momentarily frozen, processing what had just occurred. My father, who had once deemed me unsuitable for leadership, who had dismissed Cornerstone's approach as idealistic and impractical, was now suggesting potential collaboration between our firms. 2 weeks later, I received a formal email from Andrew, with my father copied. Mitchell Urban Design has been approached about a major redevelopment opportunity for the Riverfront District in Cambridge. The client has specifically requested an integrated community approach similar to Harborview Point. Would Cornerstone consider a joint proposal? The project scale would benefit from Mitchell's resources, while the community elements align with Cornerstone's expertise. The Riverfront District was one of the largest urban renewal opportunities in the greater Boston area, a former industrial zone along the Charles River with significant historical structures, environmental challenges, and community sensitivity. It represented exactly the kind of transformative project Cornerstone had been founded to pursue, but at a scale that would stretch our current resources. After careful consultation with my team, I agreed to an exploratory meeting, which is how, on a crisp autumn morning, I found myself walking the riverfront site with my father and brother, our respective senior teams following at a discreet distance as we surveyed the dilapidated warehouses, overgrown lots, and neglected waterfront that held such tremendous potential. The warehouse district has historical significance, my father observed as we examined the brick buildings with their distinctive sawtooth roofs, worth preserving rather than demolishing. Agreed, I replied. They could be exceptional spaces. For the community elements, artist studios, maker spaces, classrooms, similar to what we did at the Kensington, but on a larger scale. He nodded thoughtfully. The Kensington adaptive reuse was masterfully handled. You maintained industrial character while creating thoroughly contemporary function. The compliment, delivered matter-of-factly, caught me by surprise. Thank you. The constraints led to creative solutions. Constraints often do, he acknowledged. Something I may have forgotten over the years, designing primarily for clients with unlimited budgets and conventional expectations. We continued our site walk, discussing water access, solar orientation, flood mitigation, and community connections. It was the most normal professional conversation we had shared in years. Two architects evaluating a site's potential, separate from family history. As we prepared to leave, my father paused. This riverfront project, it represents an opportunity to demonstrate that different architectural philosophies can complement rather than oppose each other, that Mitchell and Cornerstone can each contribute distinct values to create something neither could achieve alone. I hope so, I replied cautiously. As do I, he said, then added with uncharacteristic directness. both professionally and personally. In the months that followed, Mitchell Urban Design and Cornerstone Development Group worked together to develop a joint proposal for the Riverfront District. The process wasn't without tensions, deeply ingrained habits and assumptions created. Occasional friction, but gradually, a remarkable synthesis emerged. The proposal combined Mitchell's expertise in landmark buildings and complex site planning with Cornerstone's innovations in community integration and environmental responsiveness. The result was unlike anything either firm would have created. Independently, a development that promised both architectural distinction and genuine social benefit. When we presented the concept to the Cambridge Development Authority, their response was immediate and enthusiastic. The chairperson specifically noted how the proposal bridges the traditional gap between architectural ambition and community service, creating a development that enhances Cambridge both visually and functionally. The joint venture was approved, with groundbreaking scheduled for the following spring. A press release went out announcing the historic collaboration between Mitchell Urban Design and Cornerstone Development Group. Father and daughter united professionally after years of divergent paths. At the press conference, a reporter asked my father about this unexpected partnership. Mitchell and Cornerstone have been seen as representing opposing philosophies in Boston architecture. What changed? My father considered the question carefully. Nothing changed, he replied finally. And everything changed. The fundamental values of excellent design remain constant, but how we implement those values must evolve to address contemporary challenges. Sometimes it takes a new generation to reveal new possibilities. He glanced at me before continuing. Rebecca Mitchell built Cornerstone on principles that I once considered impractical, but that have proven remarkably effective. The riverfront. Collaboration allows both our firms to create something more meaningful than either could achieve alone. Later, as we reviewed the presentation materials in a conference room, my father examined the renderings with professional attention. The integration of historical elements with contemporary additions is seamless, he noted, and the circulation between public and private spaces is exceptionally fluid. That was Andrew's contribution, I acknowledged, giving my brother credit for his innovative approach to the transitional spaces. He's developed a remarkable sensitivity to how people actually move through environments. My father looked between us, something like pride flickering across his usually composed features. It seems I have two children with genuine architectural vision, just expressed in different ways. The moment of family acknowledgement was brief but significant, perhaps the closest we would come to healing the wounds of the past. Not through emotional reconciliation, but through professional respect and collaboration. As the Riverfront project moved into detailed planning phases, Cornerstone continued to grow and evolve. We remained selective about our projects, choosing those that aligned with our values regardless of scale or prestige. We expanded thoughtfully, maintaining our commitment to quality over quantity, to purpose over mere profit. The Maritime Trust building, fully renovated and humming with creative energy, became a showcase for what Cornerstone represented: preservation balanced with innovation, beauty with functionality, commercial success with social responsibility. Architecture students touring our headquarters often commented on how the space itself embodied the firm's philosophy. 1 year after the Innovation Award, I received an invitation to deliver the keynote address at the Urban Development Council's annual symposium. Standing at the podium facing the assembled elite of Boston's architectural community, including my father and brother seated in the front row, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. Architecture at its best isn't just about creating buildings, but about fostering connections, I told the audience. Connections between people and places, between past and future, between different communities that might otherwise remain separate. Our greatest achievement as architects isn't in the structures we create, but in the lives those structures enrich and the possibilities they enable. As I spoke, I caught my father's eye. He offered a small, genuine nod, not expansive approval, but professional acknowledgement from one architect to another, from one firm principal to another. It was enough. Walking through the Maritime Trust building later that evening, with Boston's skyline glittering outside the arched windows, I passed the display wall showcasing Cornerstone's projects: Dorchester, Community Center, the Kensington Factory renovation, Harborview Point, and now the Riverfront District joint venture with Mitchell. Each represented a step in our evolution from rebellious startup to established innovator, from outsider to influencer. Most gratifying was not the industry recognition or the growing portfolio of prestigious commissions, but the tangible impact of our work. The diverse communities flourishing at Harborview, the creative enterprises thriving at the Kensington, the neighborhood revitalization surrounding Dorchester. These were the true measure of architectural success, not awards or magazine covers, but positive human outcomes. The journey from Mitchell Urban Design to Cornerstone Development hadn't been what I expected when I walked away 3 years earlier. It had been harder in some ways, more fulfilling in others, and ultimately more transformative than I could have imagined. Most surprisingly, it had led not to permanent estrangement from my family, but to a different kind of relationship. One, based on professional respect rather than personal approval. My father still didn't fully embrace Cornerstone's philosophy, but he acknowledged its validity and impact. My brother was actively incorporating elements of our approach into Mitchell's practices, bridging the gap between our firms traditionally, opposing perspectives. And every day, my name appeared prominently on buildings throughout Boston, including on the Henderson Development headquarters, where Mitchell Urban Design maintained its offices. The same building my brother entered each morning, now featuring Cornerstone's award-winning Harborview Point on its facade for all to see. The quiet, detail-oriented daughter they had once dismissed had built something too significant to ignore, not to prove them wrong, but to demonstrate what was possible when architecture prioritized human experience alongside aesthetic achievement. In the end, that was the most satisfying victory of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.